DNA is very simple. It's an informational storage system. And I like to put the analogy that it's like an instrument. All right. So human beings were like guitar, a dog's like a violin, elephant's a piano. So every species is an instrument. Now, you play the instrument ever so slightly different and you get a different song. And that's the same thing with human beings. Look how many different human beings there are with the exact same instrument. We all have the same genes, and it's just what's going on, right? People put this idea that there are one little change in the genome equals all these differences. But the reality is not what we're learning is that no, it's the way in which you're using the genes on a time-based execution is what's causing all these differences. Is at least it's a big part to it. Now we're seeing it. And so that's really what this idea of epigenetics is.
I never give up. I never give up. I never give up.
Hi guys, welcome back to Neff Inspiration, my show on YouTube and as a podcast with me, your host, Stefan Neff. Today I've got Daniel Tausan with me. Daniel is a life science consultant who is going out there and truly making this world a better place because he uses epigenetics, he uses biohacking, and whatever your personal feelings are towards those words, the science behind it is intriguing, and the science behind it is what drives Daniel and me to look into our own bodies, not just with the little bit of half-hearted interest, but no, with a nerdy kind of extreme science look into the metabolic chaos that ranges within our cells, looking at the roles of the genetic factors that may or may not so much play a role. And it's amazing because there are so many answers there with regards to literally curing disease that in the Western world is at best managed, when in reality we can turn back time. We can literally change our outlook. We can change certainly our health span, but sometimes also we can change our lifespan. Now that's cool shit, and I can't wait to nerd out today with Daniel. Welcome onto my show.
I'm super excited to share some secrets here that are simple, yet just getting ever so more interesting on the science side of what we can look at, what we can just talk about, why things work the way they work.
Isn't it? And it's so beautiful because there has always been this philosophical nature or nurture kind of argument, but these were arguments of belief when really 100 years or 50 years ago we had bugger all science. Nowadays that is changing rapidly. We are
Yeah,
exponentially
I have quite.
exploring things.
Sorry, I'm gonna jump in right. I really didn't never liked the idea of nature versus nurture. I
Huh?
think that's quite a distraction, put you down a conversation that never has a solution because the whole idea of epigenetics, it's nature and nurture, right? It's not 50-50. And it's not that
Absolutely.
nature you're talking about genetics, that's the sequence. And that's just because that's the way our technology evolved to be able to look at what a genome is. But the genome doesn't do anything unless there's a massive proteome able to actually play the chords of the genome, right?
I
And
love it.
so for the people that are not as nerdy as us, and I think we have to be careful not to go down too deep into it, right? DNA is very simple. It's an informational storage system, and I like to put the analogy that it's like an instrument, right? So human beings were like guitar, a dog's like a violin, elephant's a piano. So every species is an instrument. Now, you play the instrument ever so slightly different, and you get a different song. And that's the same thing with human beings. Look how many different human beings there are with the exact same instrument. We all have the same genes, and it's just what's going on, right? People put this idea that there are one little change in the genome equals all these differences. But the reality is not what we're learning is that no, it's the way in which you're using the genes on a time-based execution is what's causing all these differences. Is at least it's a big part to it. Now we're seeing it. And so that's really what this idea of epigenetics is. And it's used a few different ways within the science community. This is where I think the conversation, nature versus nurture, it just gets you talking about stuff that never really gets you to the next step.
I love it. 100% agreed. But this is, again, this is an insight that we too are passionate about, but that is not really touted out there, that is not really said, and certainly not taught. When I started university, sort of late in the last century, that sounds already weird, but 30, 40 years ago, there was very clear there are some genetic markers or some genes that are there. If you have it, you're in trouble. End of the story. And for some of these things, that still is true. If we look at certain genes that are strongly associated with breast cancer, or certain genes that are associated strongly with, let's say, bone disorders, we have these links. There are strong associations there. But what we have learned is that there are so many more genes out there that are sometimes playing a role and sometimes not. And that is the intriguing thing. It's not just one gene, one genetic mutation, but how many genes are there actually? Do we have a figure?
So there's about 25,000 in the human genome.
Mhm.
And you say approximate because sometimes you get into these weird repetitions.
Mm.
So it's about 25,000. And the
Yeah.
funny thing is a rice plant has got 4 times the genome.
And
So
if we, no, no, Daniel, if you're saying that we are, as a holistic being, we are not just the genes handed down from mommy and daddy, we are actually also the genome of our gut microbiome and other microbiomes. So the bacteria, viruses, fungi that are living within us, that are actually part of us. There are 100 times as many genes in those things that make us as well. Remember, 95% of serotonin is made in the gut by the gut microbiome and not in our brain. So, talk about happiness and talk about gut feelings gives it complete new meaning, isn't it?
no, absolutely. The notion that rice plant has got more genes is just that at one point in time, people thought the more genes, more complexity,
Oh,
right? And that's absolutely not the case. And so it's interesting how wrong people have been throughout these, call it fashions in science. And I think it's very hard for someone to understand what that means because when they hear it, they think, oh, that's science, not being able to distinguish science from story. And this is where, in a big part, what my work is that I meet people in which health has gone, let's say, subpar. It's starting to hit into chronic disease levels. And the medical system has failed them in a lot of ways. It's not there to help them. It's there to give them something hey, you're sick, here it is, and come back if you figure it out. And it's where I wanted to take this is that, help me out here, Neff. It's not the,
I think the reality is we have got the privilege of choice. And I think so many of us don't realize how powerful our choices are and how powerful you are within your epigenetics. You have got the choice of turning your life completely around. You have your choice of undoing damage that has been laid down. Now, there will be a certain degree of things that don't work. So you can't expect 70 years of bad nutrition and then you do half a year of good stuff and that is completely undoing the damage of 70 years. I'm sorry, that doesn't work. But you can do a tremendous amount of change regardless what your genes are because those
absolutely,
genes depends upon how you play the piano, depends upon how
exactly.
you play your guitar, and that's the amazing thing. So you have got so much more power over your health, and that power and wisdom is encoded in you, but not in the genes. It's the epigenetic soup. It's the ability to us play the keys of the organ in a different way, and suddenly you've got rhythm and blues coming out rather than a sad death march. And that is our choice. And we we
Absolutely.
too
And
we too just scratch the surface. Because even as a scientist, you are nerded out, even more so than me. And you're going into things, but we're only just beginning to scratch the surface. However, many exponentially more publications have come out in recent years, and we are constantly finding new things, methylation pathways that we can affect something with nutraceuticals, with behaviors. We can change a lot of things already, but we are only beginning to understand it. And every year there are new insights, certainly in our field of epigenetics, of lifestyle medicine. And it's so bloody gorgeous. I love it. I love it, love it, love it.
absolutely. So there's a point there for the genes that you're dealt,
Mm,
and there's a really good example for Alzheimer's.
mm,
There's a gene that's associated with Alzheimer's, ApoE4. So
mm.
it's this cholesterol-based apolipoprotein. It's very specific for synapses in the brain. And so we you'd expect the genetics to be a really good marker for health and disease, but the more we look at individuals, the more people come forward and get their DNA sequenced, you start seeing, oh, wait a minute, a lot of people have ApoE4, but they never have any Alzheimer's. And what
Mhm.
happened there? Oh, well, they had a certain lifestyle.
Exactly.
They had a certain belief system. And
Exactly.
so the belief systems that people adopt ends up really guiding where their health is going to be.
Mm,
And so this is the whole idea of where's your timeline trending.
mm,
You get to decide.
mhm,
For about 2 to 5%, there is what I would say clear genetic diseases. It's you called at one point in time inborn errors of metabolism,
mhm.
but we stopped labeling more of the genes that we found in this area of inborn errors of metabolism, and we started giving them new names because I do think people like to discover things, especially in the medical world or the science world, and start naming it after themselves. But I've talked to individuals that were, for example, diagnosed with Marfan syndrome.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the guy, I'm like, Marfan syndrome? Well, but you said you played basketball at high school. He's like, yeah, I play high level basketball. How does that make sense? If you have a non-functional protein, it's going to be very compromising for how your heart functions. There's just no way that your heart could get up to 190, 200 beats per minute. Are you kidding? Who told you this? How did they even get to this conclusion, right? And so that was one of the first stories where I was very shocked at how loosely people were being told they have genetic problems. And I was like, wow, you need to go through quite the ringer to be able to say exclusively that you have a genetic
Yeah.
condition.
Yeah.
But yet now, with the amount of publications, and I'm not the biggest fan of GWAS studies, like genome-wide association studies, because when you try and follow them from a research perspective, most of it is duds. You try to make animal models around these. It's like, well, all these hits that these publications came, there's nothing really coming of that. But where genetics has done a phenomenal job in being applicable very much so right now
Mm.
is with unfortunately whatever side you're on is with drugs. We can really quickly see which drug would be metabolized by a particular genome, and the pharmacogenomics is something that's useful, right? But if someone comes to me like, here's my genome, what should I be eating? Let's look at your blood instead. Why don't you tell me how you feel first if you eat something? Do you get indigestion? That's a faster response than me combing through the genome, because how am I supposed to make those associations?
Absolutely.
You have 25,000 genes we're supposed to look at and
Mm.
narrow it down to maybe even a couple of thousand. And so there's a really, I think, skewed view on what genetics is. And the fact that this idea of epigenetics has come back into call it the forefront is funny, because this is what was kind of like uh, dismissed 50 years ago. They're like, oh, this idea of Lamarck and inherited characteristics. We just switched it, instead of saying inherited characteristics, into epigenetics, because we sort of wanted to forget this notion that, wait, these ideas have already come forward.
That's true. That's very true. But it's weird. Let's go back. Many of us are doing nowadays checking their genomes. They just don't know that they do it, because if you go to Ancestry or your DNA or whatever, my DNA 123, these are all gene testings. They're all done for the purpose of ancestry and to see where you're coming from. But you can send exactly the same genes. You can send them to a lab who does then do a genetic testing. It just looks at the same genes just from a medical point of view. And I think that is quite intriguing. That is quite a positive thing. And I think there is something really good to be said about that, because when I did my genes for the 50th birthday. My wife gave me sort of an ancestry test, and it was the start of a journey, start into a rabbit hole, really. And because I then utilized the data and sent it off to other providers and did exactly that. And here was, due to trauma and trauma in my life, I was relying in the past on alcohol. And looking back in my ancestry, there were a lot of people who relied on alcohol because none of my family had a nice life. And so I thought there's a genetic predisposition to alcoholism. Turns out, in my genes, no alcoholic traits there. We know there are about 12 different genes that are sort of linked with alcoholism. Sorry, I'm a low risk. Figure that. So only because you assume something doesn't make it right. So the DNA testing helped me to see some of the myths and some of this wrong beliefs into genes. So I find that intriguing. I find also DNA testing very valuable to actually check for those high risk conditions. And there is certainly a role for that. Otherwise, I find it more of a curiosity value. In general terms, would you agree with that? Or do you think that genetic testing should be part and parcel of every health workup?
I'll break that down into a few answers so maybe people understand my point of view. One, I think you're 100% right. It's for fun. And for example, I got my genome, and I found the most interesting thing in the genome was I'm a fast caffeine metabolizer. I already knew that because I can have coffee at 6, 7 at night, fall asleep, no problem. I don't feel any interruptions to my sleep. So that was the most interesting in my genome. And the other big risk part was it has high risk for arthritis. Now,
Mhm.
because I am the guy that's supposed to make the call it associations saying which ones we want to put forward, which ones aren't, I get to select studies. I see the back end. I'm responsible to validate the back end. I know that those markers are not very good. So what do I mean by that? I mean that my population that I'm looking at is a population that has arthritis. So everything that we see that is a little bit different, we'll just say, well, that's an arthritis marker. And so we do that for so many different, call it
Yeah.
genes, because if you wanted to know the caffeine one, that one's simple. You take the enzyme, you put it in a test tube, and you do, the little lab experiment. This is true. So you take this variant, it doesn't metabolize as fast. You see the kinetics. But for almost all of the other stuff, it is an absolute just guess. And it's as good as your sample population. So if we had an extremely healthy population, everyone would be like, well, your genes are good. Now that doesn't sell well, right? So because that doesn't sell well,
You cynic,
and
man.
I'm in the industry, so I do understand how you have to have a reason why you have the test. So the reason why I say it's fun, and I do agree 100% that we do know some high risks genes. And it is useful for you to know if you're high risk because then how much you're allowed to push and abuse your body in certain directions. And that is very useful to know. And for example, if you know that you have that ApoE4 variant, then you know that you don't really have an option to say slack off and not exercise for 3 months because the people that never got, and when I say exercise, I mean walking. That's just the amount that you need. So the individuals that made it to 80, 85 and never died with Alzheimer's and they still had that variant, their lifestyle was they walked their dog. They got a dog and they had to walk the dog. And you think, well, what else they do? They were never sedentary.
Mm.
And so something very simple of maintaining this use case. Their diet was mid. It was nothing phenomenal. And so I think in science, the very thing that's important is to always look the fast route of doing science. Is there something that's going to say very clearly that my model or my idea is wrong? If that's the case, then I have to readjust and understand that I'm talking about percentages and that there's way more things at play. And the thing is that there's about a few of us that understand probabilities and not understand it, but think in probabilities. And so we understand obviously that's going to be the case. But for the general public that wants to buy tests and have these definitive answers about themselves, this is where I think just when you're born, it would be very useful to get your genome sequenced. That's just part of what we do as a society because the only way from my end that I get to now be the smart guy, be like, oh, let me tell you all these cool stories about genetics, is that I actually have a database, a good one, that's big, and in which we actually follow you through your life. I'm missing my fifth tooth. I just never got the adult teeth. That's in my genome. So if we wanted to take my genome and be like, well, for the dentists, for the individuals studying bone formation, dental formation, here is a knockout clearly in this guy's genome. Use it, and you'll figure out the signaling pathway that's necessary in order to get to the fifth tooth. But look how many people have unique scenarios, yet we're never going to take their genome and we're never going to actually put that data together to move forward. Why? Because everyone's working independently in their own little clusters, doing
Sure.
half-baked kind of approaches to tell you have these kind of risks where it takes someone like myself or yourself to sit with someone and be like, hey, look what's interesting. Because I find it interesting. So if I find it interesting,
Mm.
I can share that. And there is a lot in genetics, but in terms of, hey, I want to get a test that's helping my health right now, go get a blood test.
Exactly.
It is live, it's dynamic, it's reflective to your immediate what you're doing.
Mm.
And there's just so many variables in the blood. So this is where I've spent a lot of time nerding out and I've helped companies
Mm.
develop algorithms to evaluate. And what I did was biological age, right?
I see.
Because it's so easy to communicate biological information to anybody when you just tell them, hey, you're 55, but your blood looks like a 30-year-old, right? Versus, oh, you have a reduced chance for all-cause mortality, or you have a 30% arthritis. What does that mean?
Exactly right. And that was my next question, actually, because ultimately we use genetic markers as a part of our understanding of what it means for us as lifespan and health span. And that has then developed now and evolved into the different biological clocks. And we need to say different biological clock. Here you are as a scientist and say, yes, you have got the body age of a 36-year-old. Now that's actually bullshit. Because in reality, there are many different ways of looking at it. So you're taking surrogate markers and assume that they have some value to play and some predictive value as regards to lifespan. Now, I'm saying that so critically because we have been there with the telomere length. So it's certain mechanisms within the cell that are moving chromosomes and are working with them. We can measure how long these things are, and telomere length was at one stage deemed that's the measure of how long you live. Now, that was disproven. So we are basically learning and we're picking something up and say, that's it. So therefore it must be true. And then 5 years later, we are actually saying, no, that's a heap of baloney. So it's tricky, isn't it? These biological clocks, how reliable are they?
I am just phenomenal. Thank you so much for just calling the bullshit out right away because it absolutely is. So why is that the case? And not maybe not to make people dissuaded from
Mm,
it, but just to maybe get the understanding that I made an algorithm, but it works for 60% of the population, right? So it will work for 60% of the time. And
mm,
and it might work for you one time, but not the next time because something happened in your life that now puts you in a different bucket that needs to have a different way of analyzing it. And
mm,
so we can make three buckets. I think people understand. This is how I analyze blood. This is what I do, is that I have to decide whether you fit in what I would say the average, the diseased, or the resilient phenotype.
okay.
Because no, or at least I know from everything I've come through, that you don't have the same response depending on which bin you're in or which state, bin from the data side, right?
Mm,
So the disease one is the most complicated, and you can see that with just liver diseases. We just take one scenario. You got carcinomas from liver, you got fatty livers, you got fibrotic livers, you got, and we can go down the list. And even two individuals that are experiencing the same disease won't have the same metabolome and proteome because
mm,
their liver is compensating differently
mm,
because it might have a different starting point. It has a different etiology to get the disease. So now that you see, well, the disease state can have so many weird signals. It might have signals that are called bystander signals, meaning that
mm,
it's changing, but has absolutely nothing to do with what's going on.
mm,
And so good luck trying to figure out a calculation there that's going to give them an age. You can't even do a biological age for an individual because they're in a disease state. You
mm,
just know that they have a reduced life expectancy based off the disease and mortality.
mm,
So the idea of biological age is great in terms of communicating complex data.
mm,
And I found it easier to communicate than risk. Because to me, risk, I think, is just absolute, it's just also a very poor way to say we use the method of, hey, someone died at some age with some disease. And now we're going to calculate back a risk value, say how fast you're going to get there.
mm.
But for example, I have a 91-year-old with Alzheimer's, and he's still alive. His blood does not look good. His blood, if you do some kind of biological age calculation, comes like 180. So, but he's still alive, right? So, where's his risk value? Can you calculate a risk value for him?
Yeah.
So, to understand that these are tools used for big data and for just general understanding from a we're collecting information. What can we do with it?
Mm,
And I do think that call it the medical world, the scientific world, has just been not bamboozling the world with it, but been very confident in something that is clearly subpar at the personalized level. It's super subpar at the personalized level to the point where when you have to talk to an individual, you're almost trying to avoid saying any of these things where you're just trying to communicate a very simple thing,
nice,
or you have a high risk.
nice.
So now that we know that, how do you then take that into account for the individual? How do we make a personalized approach to go
Mm,
about it? And this is where the age again becomes a simple way of communicating. You can go any way you like, but what we're doing is we're trying to say, well, I can use the blood. I can use, for example, your lung capacity.
mm,
I can use your heart rate. I can use your blood pressure. This is a little helpful because now I'm going not just across the blood system, I'm
mm,
going across the cardiovascular system, the ventilator system, and I can add in maybe some other things, but just maybe those. Those are the physical ones that are maintaining the fundamental pressure and just the sustaining the vitals. If they are in good standings, and so for the 91-year-old gentleman, his lung capacity is phenomenal. And
interesting.
I've been biased since I was a kid to really think about the individuals that have a very large lung capacity. They seem to do better always. You get struck, VO2 max, for example. You can get struck by lightning. You have a higher chance of surviving if your VO2 max is higher. That's just a weird thing. But it makes sense when you understand what that measurement is conveying about the individual, about all the systems working together. And so this is where a blood test is useful, but it's not definitive. But it is useful. It gets way more useful if you've done the same blood test for 10 years.
Mm.
And the conventional blood tests that we have at the clinics are pretty boring. They don't tell you that much information because, for example, I would call them the alarm bell measurements, meaning they're only out of range when there's something really clearly wrong. But there's already something clearly wrong. You don't need them. Now, when you go in with what's available in the market today, I'm sure your side of the world also has these blood tests that are available, but you can get into markers that talk about what your health is in three ways. So one is the risk. Obviously, haze it on range, does it tell me liver disease, kidney disease, so on and so forth. The other one is biological age. Does it communicate? Does it change with age naturally? Because now if it does change with age naturally, and let's say decreases or increases, you can actively try and support that organ because that marker is made somewhere. So support the organ, whatever the organ is. And can you keep that level going as a way to be able to help you make decisions? Is my lifestyle working with this marker? And that's just one marker. And then the last one is does the marker change with your fitness level? Because as crude as it is, I think Denmark and Norway are some of the biggest publications for exercise physiology. And when I was tasked with, well, we know disease, what's health on the molecular level, and where do you look, right? When you go to a doctor, hey, I'm healthy, but I want to get healthier. He's like, get the hell out of my office. Don't waste my time. I got people I need
Oh,
to see,
100%
right?
agree. I love it. And I always
So
always compare it with a Lamborghini, or you've got a super sports car, and do you just put enough oil in that the red light doesn't come on? Do you just put enough water in that the temperature doesn't rise? No, you want to have it optimally tuned, and you might spend a lot of money on your car. Yet when it comes to our body, we don't do that, and it's the same.
no,
We rely
absolutely.
on alarm bells going off. I love your alarm bell, dear.
Yes,
My
and fitness is one in which is really useful because there are some biomarkers, and there's not a lot, but there's a subset of them that change when you become more adapted to stress.
Mm,
So they're not technically exercise, but it's not like you just got physically strong. Is that you're now able to deal with stress, and I use that word stress. I know it's not biologically, you're not allowed to use it in a biological setting, but I think people understand it. You're able to deal with stress more, any kind of stress. And so obviously just by getting your heart rate up and doing bare minimum, just going up some stairs, up and down, you will eventually adapt your system to deal with more stress than just the stairs,
mm,
but through dealing with social interactions, through dealing with managing heavy workloads and all the on and so forth.
mm,
So these markers, they're really interesting because those are the ones that I would say push you out of that average category, average state, average bin, into the resilient phenotype. Because
mm,
now once your body adapts into the resilient phenotype, your blood actually changes the way you do when you do things. So you put a regular individual through a bout of exercise, their blood variables change. You put the resilient individual through exercise, and it doesn't change the same way anymore.
mm,
And there's this switch, this adaptation that it begins to occur.
mm,
And we know that individual can survive a lightning strike, can survive a
mm,
car crash, can survive not many, but a few people have survived falling out of a plane, and that's crazy to think.
mm,
So to me, that's sort of this interesting part because all right, let's bring the science in and let's allow this to be now technology and information people can use to gauge where they're at in life. Because everyone that thinks they're all, well, I'll just work out 6, 7 days a week. Good luck. You might do that for a year, a
mm,
2, 3. You get it going for 5. I'm impressed.
mm,
No one does that for a lifetime. And often those individuals actually have a very poor lifespan because they have a stroke or cardiovascular event. So
mm,
for longevity, there's two parts in which I would communicate is that we have the cell. The cell has to be able to make it to 100, just the cellular component. So DNA being called the most
mm,
important, that's your renewal.
mm,
And then the proteins, they're relatively stable. And the metabolites, they fluctuate, they can go up and down. But you need the cell to be able to make it to 100.
mm,
But you can have the cell being like the athletes. They make wicked cells, but they don't do a good job of the physiological correspondence, right? The physiology has to not break.
yeah.
So you can't burst the pipe. You can't, then that's usually the biggest problem.
Mm,
It's a pipe burst in the brain or it's a pipe burst somewhere else or a
yeah.
clogged one. So this is the sort of the balancing tipping
Yeah.
point.
But
Are
Daniel,
your
just
actions helping this?
let me ask you here. We are talking VO2 max, which is the maximum oxygen consumption that you can do. So it's basically how much you can breathe and how much you can stress your cardiovascular and lung system together, so to speak. Now, we can train that, and an athlete does train that. So they have got clearly far better VO2 max. But at the moment, you're saying, well, hang on, these are hurting themselves in other ways and therefore reducing their longevity. So, how does that work out? So, again, a marker, even a valid marker like VO2 max, is not 100% reliable, is it?
Absolutely not. No. So the VO2 max is great, but you can think of it in terms of you have an engine, but how big is the engine inside the chassis of the car? And so you might be a really, really big guy, but you might have a tiny chassis. And
Yeah.
that's fine. But how much percentage of the engine are you using? Using all of it or none? So now you have to keep all that within
Right.
a certain confines where
Right.
you might not get the best bet. But the
Mm.
reason why the athletes always developing a VO2 max is a good idea. And so your resting heart rate is a good example
Yeah.
of how you train your body throughout life. And so often athletes will adapt their blood their heart and how it pumps.
Mm.
And that's good. So one pump equals stronger, more blood flow, less work overall.
Mm.
And so you might be 50, but because you did a whole boatload of stuff in your 20s or when you're teens or whatnot, you might have adapted a very, very good heart.
Mm.
Now, that's now calls for a certain type of lifestyle and maintenance that you must engage in.
Mm.
Because if you don't, what happens to a lot of athletes? They get a heart attack or they get stroke. So their cells are great, but they didn't respect the fact that they have to go through a detraining process, a
Mm.
maintenance process.
Mm.
They have to do different you can't just follow the general guidelines
Mm.
if you're in that resilient category because your heart may be able to pump at a certain pressure, but a blood vessel may not be able to maintain it, and you didn't do a good job of reinforcing your blood vessels. And so
Mm.
this is where we see athletes die or ex-athletes die. There's a recent soccer player, I forget, the Argentinian, he had aneurysm. There's another example. So
Mm.
even of the big names, often this high intensity lifestyle of
Mm.
partying and other kind of choices doesn't
Yeah.
do well afterwards. And so you'd never see the high level athletes make it to 100 years old.
Mm.
And I've been fascinated with the Centurions as a point, it's just a point of interest. What are they doing and what can we learn from them?
And that is so intriguing, isn't it? Centurions, people who grow old, and there's a so-called blue zone out there. If you look in the world, there are certain areas, certain sections where people tend to live longer. And I think
I
that
would say a
has
little bit about bullshit there with the Blue Zone. I really didn't like their take on it. And I can go into it, but I didn't like that.
I give you the general. I give the audience a bit of an overview. So basically, they looked around. Where are people that routinely grow older than maybe the rest? And for the Americans, typical life expectancy is what, about 80. I think 83 in males. But having said that, it has reduced recently. So we're actually certainly the Americans are getting sicker and sicker. And we know that. We see an obesity epidemic there, and it's just chaotic. But let's put that aside. Let's look at the opposite. Let's look at the people who routinely grow to 100. And these were dubbed the blue zones, and researchers went there and sort of tried to figure out what are they eating, what kind of exercise do they have, what are the factors, and essentially eating, exercise, and community. These were sort of the big things that sort of stood out amongst other things. And so that was actually a nice thing because that then led the WHO to actually become out, many other institutions to come out and actually say, no, sedentary lifestyle is the new smoking. We can't accept that anymore. If you don't move, if you're just being a couch potato, to just use a negative label, then it's the same as if you smoke a pack a day, as far as the risks are concerned. So I actually liked that push from institutions and insurance companies, etc., to say, get off your ass, do something. So that was actually positive. But it's interesting. I heard your criticism and I wonder what your thoughts are on that. I think we both agree activity and exercise is phenomenal in extending our health span and lifespan.
Absolutely. So movement is not an option, right? Movement is a must. That's the actual real human tax. You think you came here, let's say you were some nebulous entity of a soul wandering the cosmos, you saw planet Earth. I want to experience that. That looks great. That's the tax. You must move. Technically, the definition of death is the cessation of movement. on both the molecular sense and in the gross
Uh,
anatomical sense.
I love that.
It'll apply to all levels, at all layers of biology. But the reason why I say the blue zones were done a disservice is that, for example, Hunza, Afghanistan, you have in mountains, people regularly live to 100 years old. I was just in Wyoming, and I met a gentleman that was 101. And so Wyoming was in a place you think that you'd find a centurion. So the reason why I say it's a disservice is that people get the notion, well, if I eat right and exercise, I can make it to 100. And no, that's not enough. Those are so far down the totem pole of really what we learned from the centurion that you can't be in your New York apartment. You can't be in your Detroit. Think like, okay, it'd be great just because I hit the gym once or twice and I'm eating my kale smoothie.
Yeah.
So what is it really that out the centurions? And this is work that has been done, I think, since the 70s. And I've just followed different authors. When I was an athlete, I picked up a few books to help with my nutrition and what I should be doing. And on the same scope, they talk about where they took their information from. And it was a little different time because they wasn't so saturated with, I would say, fashions and science. It was more like a rush to push out, hey, especially for individuals that are making Olympic athletes, more to push out. This is the cutting edge of what I've found. And a lot of them weren't really businessmen. A lot of them were just heavy duty scientists and great, call it coaches. And so they also weren't shy to share what they found because we're still on the cusp of even understanding what it was. But the first one really goes in, what every single one talks about is sleep. But really the big overarching idea is recovery systems, right? If you understand that the moment that you pooch your recovery systems, you're dead the next day. And so that's the idea with DNA. You can irradiate DNA. So you can take a cell, destroy the DNA, that cell's still alive. It can be alive for about 3 days, depending on the cell type you're working with. Drop a little bit of glucose in there, it swims over to the glucose. Drop a little toxin in there, a little bit of antigen, it'll swim away from it. So it's still alive, but it can't regenerate itself. And so when you pooch your recovery systems or when you damage your recovery systems, that is a very accelerated way of how you're going to age. So now what does that mean from the front of, okay, what are we doing from day to day? So if you eat healthy and exercise, but you're damaging your recovery systems, it doesn't matter. You're going to accelerate the aging. So, and the next one underneath that, you think like, okay, nutrition is very simple. You simply have to ingest your bare minimum requirements. Let's put it that way. Whatever diet suits those bare minimum requirements, that's fine. Because what's really coming into the forefront is understanding that we're not meant to constantly eat food and consuming food constantly. And it's a lot more complicated metabolism, but I explain it through nervous system first, just because it's easy. Flight or fight can immediately override the rest and digest within a half a second. You need to run from a lion, blood starts going to the muscles, run, and you're no longer digesting food. And there isn't the opposite. You have to now wait 30 minutes to an hour, maybe two, to relax before you can get back into the rest and digest. But it's rest, digest, recover, repair. It's a lot more than what we put with that small little limerick or whatever it is. So in the metabolism sense, when we eat, what we do is say, I'm going to turn on a 4 hour to 6 hour program of turning croissant into Daniel, right? You eat a mango, you turn that mango into Stefan, right? So you have that program takes about 4 to 6 hours. Now, depending what you eat, it might take longer. You can't do other functions when that's active. And so what are those other functions? It's repair, redistribute, recover. It's, we call autophagy. But the thing I would say, just the same idea with autophagy, and it's the same story of telomeres. Understand that we're talking about 200 different cell types. And the telomere story was only in white blood cells.
Right.
So that's the thing. I think people, a little bit, basic question is like, what are you talking about in the body? And it's not easy to get to every aspect that you'd like. But the most important organ for longevity is your liver, right? So I talked about it a few times here because as soon as your liver switches from it can't handle the burden anymore, it can no longer clean your blood the way it used to. And your glands now are going to go down. And that does impact your cognition. So, always find it funny when people think like exists somewhere, inches between their eyes. Like you're all of it. Trust me. That's why when you drink heavy one night, you wake up the next day, you feel awful. Your whole entire mood, persona, and then that you have a great day, you have coffee and you feel great, you feel elated, right? It's everything works together. You're not separate from, anyway, so that's a little side story. But that idea of respectful eating, call it intermittent fasting, but I need help making up a new name because that's default biology.
Exactly.
Meals a day, maximum one meal, that's
Exactly.
fine. Having things that are small, like herbs, teas, things like that, they don't really start the digestive process. They're useful. And so we used to do that quite a bit more. We would chew on things to help satiate, call it the itch or the need
Mm.
to
Mm.
stimulate ourselves because, nutrition, oh man, that nutritional science that we another, I think, talk altogether, but fats did not belong as a macronutrient. And I'd say that a lot of that has done a disservice in helping people bridge some of the gaps in what is the biology that runs
Yeah.
us. And so fasting is a component in which anybody that's made it to 100 has somehow put in their life. So the gentleman that lives in Wyoming, he wakes up, he's a rancher, he wakes up really early. He has breakfast really early, which is, like they you can't eat early. You have to eat at 10 o'clock or something, which is fine, all right, as a general guideline. But he ate at 6 and he ate at 1 and then he didn't eat for the rest of the day. So he's fasting for like to 18 hours every single day. He had the stuff that some people wouldn't suggest. He had a lot of, call it meat, and he had a lot of was available to him in front of him. And I think, okay, well, it seems like something that keeps coming to the forefront where all the people that I really, let's say, double down on was the people that said you need to eat food that's alive.
Mm.
And the people that know a little bit about science, you can take a metabolomics panel, take the same food that is instant live, run a sample, and you'll see a bunch of squiggles in terms of, hey, what's there of the metabolites. And then take one that you preserved for maybe a week or two or a month. You'll see that you've lost metabolites.
Mm.
And you're like, well, what are they doing? Well, there's too much work. We're slowly doing it as humanity goes through their ringer. But there's such a plethora of bioactive molecules present that there isn't a time in the world to start parsing every single one. When we
Mm.
take a look at coconut oil, for example, we know a few of the organic acids now, very specifically what they can do, but there's still a lot more that we don't.
Mm.
So what would you separate out all those useful organic acids, right? Like get the MC2 oil, pay extra money to get less quality, less call it like bioactive molecules. And I think we're in this really interesting time in that sense. So we just didn't exercise yet. We've done no exercise. We've just walked. And we haven't even talked about the food we've eaten. We just said eat alive food, and you have to know when and how to eat them, right? So this is where the fashions and science have done a helpful hint because we say breakfast is the most important meal a day. And this is something I think is very important for people to know. This is one of my biggest, that we start with for anyone is that you can have breakfast whenever, 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 4 o'clock if you're eating one meal a day because it's breaking your fast.
Yeah.
It is how you teach your body to set your metabolism, right? It's not your genetics that determine your health
Mm.
today. It's your mastery of how to set your metabolism. So what are you putting in? How are you setting it to turn on?
Exactly.
And this is the part where there's a lot of biochemistry and it's how you have to know how to tailor it to your audience,
I love it.
to
I
help
love
them
it.
kind
Love
of
it,
step
brother.
step
Oh.
into it, right? So you agree? Am I on the right track here with you?
You are
Is what you've come
100%.
across?
And I think that is the key thing. We look at, for example, the Mediterranean diet, which is respected, and people say, yes, that's probably a very healthy way to live. What people don't speak about is the fact that in the Mediterranean, there are often times when you fast during the day. You don't eat, of the day, a very rich, even as healthy fats such as the omega-3s, etc., some beautiful salmon. You don't have 4 salmons over the day. And I think that people forget about that. It's so convenient to just focus on one aspect rather than be more holistic and actually look at what they eat, but also when they don't eat. And it's so important. And for example, that there is more movement associated, that there is a whole culture around movement. So in the evening, in many of the Mediterranean countries, you would go for a walk. And that is normal. After your dinner, you for a walk because it's a way of socializing. There's community suddenly involved. It's a whole thing that's far more than how many macronutrients, micronutrients, etc. consuming. It's a lifestyle, and that's where the lifestyle medicine, I guess, comes in. And everyone thinks, our lifestyle, yeah, blah, blah. That pill. We are
Yeah.
conditioned to that freaking magic pill, the new GLP-1 agonist. See, if I just get onto Ozempic, my life will be beautiful. Women will be by me like moths to the flame because I'm now on Ozempic or Viagra or whatever the new drug is.
It'll
Fuck
kill your
off.
libido though.
Touche, touche. Now, do you dare saying that? That doesn't help the sales, okay?
Of course. So the things there, the blue zones really, I think they did a disservice was, the individuals, but they didn't comment, for example, like what their materials that their house are made of.
Ah,
right?
beautiful.
Like right there's that. They a little bit of a comment on the community aspect, but even I list out what I do statistically to say from the Centurion. I can't have a empirical way to be able to assess social structure and social
Mm.
connectivity for the
Yeah.
individual. But we know 100% from everything we learned about addictions from your social connection, and
Mm.
this is my I guess opinion. This isn't really I would say as scientific. It's my I'm on it that your social status, your social network, your social connections are actually the most predictive for
Mm.
your health outcomes because
Mm.
someone like me and family, you
Mm.
just don't get to eat McDonald's. It's maybe a funny way to kind of, but don't. I'll harass about it. And so, in certain family that just doesn't allow certain behaviors, they don't let you go down it because they care for you or they worry about you. They have a way to pull you back in. And if you're not, let's just say, if you've done the thing going down the void, which obviously always can happen for people, they want to, get to the bottom. But when you have that social structure, there's an important aspect where, we like shame or guilt. And they're very important emotions because if you can no longer feel shame, you no longer have power in other people. So I know if I make a mistake, maybe tell me. Let's say if I like our feelings because I said
Mm.
something that was just
Mm.
super arrogant or whatnot or inconsiderate. If I see her pick up on it, she'll tell me that, and then I'll feel guilty, I'll feel shame,
Mm.
and that'll help me understand like, okay, well, I'll be a better person when I choose that. And so maybe those don't land perfectly, but the idea is very simple: is that like your struggle is also your connection to what you want to do in life. And often we kind of or the lottery tickets we say
Mm.
this is the problem, right? And I think for today for a young man it's video games, which is the
Mm.
exact same thing as alcohol, but maybe less destructive for your liver but more destructive for your brain, who knows, or for your heart, maybe metabolism. But the solution, these things aren't the problem, they're the solution. What are they solving? They're solving a, I think, spiritual or existential problem where this person doesn't feel a sense
Mm.
of purpose or a connection with what they want to do.
Mm.
That, when you see right away when you're like, oh, what brings you guys together? What makes you guys friends? And they light up, oh, it's, sport. We love playing these, games together. Oh, we live. You can see people light up,
Mm.
this will drive us. There's a reason why, we're a little bit different. It's so that we're not all doing the same thing. There's something you would like to do. Let's say you were again floating an infinite spirit and you're like, I'll do something here, I want to experience something you chose beforehand, hey, I have to be in, I don't know, I wanted to do this, is this cool? And there might be different ways till you get there, and when you're there, you might be not what, let's say, you initially thought, and there might be still a lack of purpose because maybe it's what you actually wanted, maybe it was what your family suggested, maybe it was
Mm.
a good business opportunity, whatever. And so I think these emotions that we're feeling is something as health side of things, trying to people, I'm starting to realize is way more important than information because I've given information out. It's funny, the people that pay a lot of money for information, they use it. But if you give information to people that don't, just want to have a conversation, the information never helps them.
Mm.
You can give them all the information in the world. They're doing the wrong thing. Why? Because the emotional response isn't there to seed into the subconscious to change behavior. So this is why, again, I say the social aspect is so key because you end up emulating, you end up soaking in other people as you're part of your personality. And when everyone's smart around you, you can't help but be smart. It's impossible. You're getting some of it. And so
Absolutely.
I have a construction worker. He's a guy. He's a very smart guy. He's not very good to articulate things, but he's been around a bunch of eggheads his entire life, you know? And he's like, man, the amount of stuff I pick up from you guys when I go to my construction site, I sound like a weirdo.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Right? So this is where I think how to talk about it too. How to get that conversation going with people. And
Mm.
when it's not in the best place, what do you do? What do you tell them? And I think the important thing to know is that no one's alone. Like you're just, especially today, look, we're halfway, across the world. And look at I'm elated to talk to you. I'm having a blast. My emotions are now through the roof. And so, look possible today,
Yeah.
and someone like-minded me, gives a lot of hope and I've hit despair, I've the trenches of despair thinking like, the ends are coming, humanity, we're all so dumb, we chance we're going to be herded like cattle into a slaughterhouse, so on and so forth. And then, such yourself, and I see like, oh, you've been dealing with this way longer than, I'm the party. That's how I feel, right?
But this is beautiful because we have got so much choice in our lives, and it is actually a crime how we waste our opportunities that the universe is delivering to us. It's giving us on a silver platter opportunities left, right, and center, and we don't recognize them as such. And that is, I think, our duty to for those of us enlightened. I'm certainly not that spiritual enlightened, and I don't sit in a yoga position on the top of a mountain. But I guess I have seen so much shit and I've experienced so much trauma and drama in my life that I understand the power of choice, the power of taking ownership, the power of every being a new opportunity to do the right thing. You can choose to eat a pie. We are in New Zealand. We love our pies, our sausage rolls. My goodness. And or you could actually choose, no, actually, I'll do some prep and I have got some salad, some beautiful bit of fermented food and some lean protein. Bingo. Okay, this you're setting up with that one decision. You've made such a huge breakthrough already. You've taken action. You have not just thought about it, but you have actually taken action and do something towards a different you. You're creating the future. And people forget that. They just are sort of passive, like lambs to the slaughter, essentially. When in reality, lambs, we can walk in 360 degrees and can choose where we want to go. And I think
Or
that's your my duty to actually spell it out.
yeah, or I was gonna say knock off the wool and realize that you're the wolf the whole time. Stop pretending.
Ooh, I like that.
Because yeah, yeah, go ahead.
You go.
Yeah, I'm 100%. You do a choice.
Yeah,
You choice to again take action and immediately saying, okay, I'll do one thing right, and that's it for today. But that's it. That'll be one thing that I did better than the day before.
yeah,
And this is where I have a guide that has this 2% solution. And I'm like, this is perfect. The life and they call it the coaching that I recommend.
yeah.
Anytime someone wants to make a drastic shift from zero to hero, it never works. Maybe two ladies did it, but they were very militant. They're actually both German, funny enough. It's almost robots. I got of them, but like, holy moly. But everyone, it doesn't work. You can't go from zero to hero, but 2% at a time
Yeah,
does work.
yeah,
And so you have to be better a little bit than the day before.
yeah.
And it does have to get smart.
It's
It
interesting that
really,
you say 2%. I say 1%. I'm
okay.
kinder. That please 15 minutes. Okay,
Hmm.
2% is half an hour. Are you telling me you can't invest half an hour into your? Both of us know
What
that.
else you doing?
Well, touche, touche. An hour. I mean, that's that hour. I guess I need to be a bit more strict, because the 2% so much more fitting. The 1% for the absolute beginner. But
Yeah,
ultimately, we wanted half an hour of exercise a day or activity. Let's not call it
something.
even exercise. Something that you move. Okay,
Yeah, just
and
in terms of your behaviors. That's
exactly
really what it is. And so it helps to get smart knowing that okay, what I'm doing is actually something I can build on.
correct.
And I think today actually one of the most hardest times, even though we have AIs and
Yeah.
information, are actually finding that a lot of individuals have gotten in their own way. They think a certain way, and the is especially if they have someone like a doctor in their family, worse off their health is, and the harder it is for them to change. They have all
So
these
true.
ideas.
So true.
It's absolutely so. One hard thing I find that people have an idea of what the immune system is, and as a scientist that's been studying cell biology for, I mean, since I'm years old, I've been fascinated with all this. 36 now, and so I still have a hard time pinpointing exactly what the immune system is because, heck, you have specific liver immune cells, but
Yeah.
then the way that you control those immune cells is through chemical signaling in which any cell can release. So now when you think of the immune system and how it's coordinated, oh, wait a minute, like you have a drop, a tiny little drop. You can open up the skull and tiny little drop of bacterial antigen, and all of a sudden all the white blood cells, they look really cool. They kind of like little spiders wake up and they go there. But it's the actual brain that released to tell them to come here, right? Didn't know that there was a problem over there, but where it landed, it didn't know there's a problem. So your whole entire body can communicate to just a subset of workers to do an action, but the
Mm.
actual process is coordinated across everything. And so now you're like, well, I see this as the immune system. That's my understanding of it. Yet you talk to someone whose health is constantly getting infection or constantly getting problems, they think, well, my immune system's the issue. I'm like, well, how do I start to try and, like just I go back here, and it's polite to tell them, well, that's wrong, because that's
Mm,
not really a good way to go about it. But until the person realizes that they have to get a little more curious,
exactly.
you're just not.
Why is your immune system in such a state? And that's exactly the root cause analysis that functional medicine does and that you do. We are looking at why is something happening, not just accepting it for the fact, yeah, it's just there. Yes, you have got some genes, and yeah, it's probably genetic. A heap of baloney. No. Yes, you might have some genetic setup. Yes, there might be quirky ways that your metabolism doesn't function as well as maybe someone else, but that's just quirky, often bystander information. The reality is you're living in a leaky house where there's black mold. You have been eating a standard American diet with ultra-processed foods 60, 70, 80% of time. You're malnourished, to even say it mildly. You're intoxicated by whatever fumes are coming out of your house, plus the disastrous health of the people around you. And you're only focusing on the immune system and not on the underlying fire that is burning around you and within you. And I think
Yeah, so
that
I don't know
is,
if you've heard this one, is that you can have A+ health in a C- environment,
oh, love it, love it, love it, love
right?
it.
And so that's exactly what you described it. And I have a doctor today, it's impossible,
Yeah.
right? To the amount of chemicals that we have, to the fact that I can order something from Bangladesh, China,
Mm.
from New Zealand, from Australia, from America, from South America, and that package with contents that I interact with that can cause problems because again maybe at the top of my resilient system I haven't done a good job of taking care of my liver and that's spilled over to the immune system and I'm misattributing it to the immune system. And so now the doctor has to see you and be like, well, there is an infinite amount of metabolites that could be causing problems. And I don't think there's ever been a time in history where there's been more of a, call it molecular chemical interaction than we have today. And I don't know, but my take, just, this is, I'll throw it to you. Take is that today is the most unhealthy human civilization has ever been in all existence
Hun-
by a landslide.
100% agreed. If we take the example of our environment, of the quotation mark, good, healthy environment, I look around here, virtually everything I look right now at is made of plastic. Now, plastic is such a plethora of different components. There are about 12,000 different chemicals involved in making plastic, quotation mark. Of these 12,000 components, 4,600 are dangerous to the humans, yet we're using them every single day. The topic of microplastics is such intriguing and weird avalanche of information that is now coming out. And indeed, for those of you interested, go onto my website. There is a 7-day microplastic course that I've created to actually, tell you guys more about it, give you the power and information how to maybe reduce the microplastics and nanoplastics that are affecting you. But this is just one example of how we are exposed to chemicals out there, and they have a field day within your health, within your organ, with how they affect the mitochondria and the cell energy systems, how your liver is getting hammered with these toxins. It is amazing. And here we think, yeah, hey, I've got a kale smoothie. I'm doing it all right. Yeah, about that. So, man, there is
Yeah, no, that's
so,
interesting.
isn't it? No, absolutely. So if you look into the
Yeah,
details
that's
there, we need to be far more cautious and we need to understand the cocktail effect. Cocktail effect, for those of you who have never come across that, a cocktail is a beautiful alcoholic drink that typically has multiple alcohol components in there. And we somehow, hey, I can link the vodka with my headache. Well, that doesn't work. You never know which kind of these five alcohols and how many of these cocktails have been responsible for your headache. You just know you've got a headache. It's the same if you try to do toxicology studies nowadays. Try to figure out, ooh, that component, that particular chemical is really causing all those health damages. And what about the other 20,000 cocktails that chemicals that you have taken in your system yesterday? And just, oh, it's tricky. So I love you on that. But I think
Yeah, no,
we need to look at a second episode and maybe third episode. Daniel,
yeah,
this is not
we
the
definitely
last
can.
time that we two are nerding out. This is impossible here because
Let's
our passion for this topic is so wow. But
there's yeah,
we have spent more together. You're an amazing man.
wonderful.
Daniel, you are my little love it. Daniel, if a lot of other people are out there saying, shit, who is this dude? I want to know more about him. How can they find you?
Right, right. The company Timeline Sciences.
Mhm,
It's very simple, right? Timeline we're part of,
mhm.
and I'm interested to know where people's timeline is going to end up.
Yeah,
And you use science to describe if you can the timeline. So
yeah.
timelinesciences.com, or you can follow me on Twitter, right, or X now, just Timeline Sciences. And if you message me, I will get back to you there. I'm not the most avid social media guy as of yet. So maybe end it on a little bit of positive note. Maybe take your let's hear you on. But I think one of the most ways to incorporate something in your supplement to be in our cabinets 50 years ago is iodine. So
Ah,
what I've found very early on, when in my 20s training people for making them fit, I had a lady just wouldn't lose weight, and I she was cheating, was lying to me, or like people don't you wasn't. After a while, I realized no, she's really pushing it, and she's doing everything right, and she's coming to me with her notes to showcase everything. So. This was before, all the science. I just asked her, like, hey, well, can you go get a few tests? Let's check if there's anything wrong. She's like, no, I'm healthy. Like, yeah, just go. Came back, and her thyroid was just not functioning.
absolutely.
Just
Absolutely.
and her fix was absolutely unbelievable. Where we're just like, okay, let's Lugos iodine with the pharmacy. Like that's the best time. And like, okay, put in some apple cider, sort of like the advised way you can get. And it took her about 2 weeks before she started losing weight rapidly and in a healthy manner, because she was doing everything right. The 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 exercise, the movement, and within months she was a different lady altogether. Like you wouldn't recognize look like. And so I've seen quite a few doctors and scientists share how deficient it is in iodine. And obviously, iodine is the master regulator of our defenses, of our metabolism.
Mm.
So I think that's a positive note to end with kind of doom and gloom of almost so many chemicals. I think it's never been more important
Yeah.
to bring up your to stay away from the medical system, by as much effort as you can. There's sort of a laughing joke or ongoing joke where we say in the seminars, you want to stay hell away from a hospital.
I couldn't agree more, man. Guys, those of you listening out there, this is part one. Daniel doesn't know it yet, but he's back for part two because so far we have addressed some of the science that is maybe has led us a little bit astray, where we have really followed more fashion than facts, where we believed more in myths and maybe people who meant well, but essentially were themselves misguided. In reality, there are actually so many more practical things we can do. And I think everyone deserves to have a part two with you, Daniel, where we two nerd out on the very practical things that everyone can do. We've already touched about some of them, the fasting, the good nutrition, the eating actually alive things, minimally processed food, to fight for your sleep. And if indeed, I mean, sleep deprivation is such a problem. I put a bit of a take in here for created a 7 day sleep course because I have suffered from insomnia in the past, and I was my worst enemy with all the stuff that went on in my head. And there is so much we can do. Again, there are many ways how you can action. And we want to infuse you, Daniel and me want to be there for you, infuse you to take action. Not just say, oh, that was a nice podcast, and then keep living the way you have been. Well, insanity is defined as trying the same thing again and again, expecting a different outcome. No, let's actually take some of the information, go out there and make a 1, 2, 3% even change. Don't go nuts, Tony Robbins style. We change everything. That's the 1st of January, New Year's resolution. No, forget it. 95% of that will not work. We can change small steps in a very consistent way, create new habits. And you guys out there, it's impossible for you not to become different, better, holistic beings out there. You will become the new version of yourself, version 2.0, 3.0. It's impossible not to improve if you follow our recommendations. Not everyone will apply to you, but the vast majority will. And I think that is the power of epigenetics, of lifestyle medicine, of functional medicine, because we are looking at you in a much healthier way, in a holistic way, the way you be treated, not just as a pill consumer that maybe makes a pharma industry a few more bucks, or the advertisement industry a few more bucks. No, you are a human being who deserves to go out there, because each and everyone has our own mission and our own purpose. We are all here to make this world the best version of ourselves, and our world bloody well needs it right now. So let's come all together. Let's form a tribe of people who want to make a change. And you start by doing it yourself. You work on yourself, and you become the role model that you always wanted to have. The best way to creating a change is being the change yourself. Daniel, you're an amazing man. Thank you so much for your time. I adored this interview.
It's been a pleasure. I absolutely love your raw personal, don't hold back. Yeah.
Okay. And you guys out there, look after yourself. Live with intention. Bye.
I never give up. I never give up. I never give up.